The Rancher's Redemption by Clara Winslow. The Winchester rifle trembled in Catherine Moreau's hands as she peered through the lace curtains of her modest schoolhouse. 3 men on horseback circled the building like vultures, their faces obscured by the shadows of their wide-brimmed hats. She had recognized the lead rider immediately, Jake Sullivan, the most notorious rancher in all of Cedar Ridge, Colorado. "Miss Moreau," his voice boomed across the dusty yard. "We need to talk." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She had been dreading this moment for weeks, ever since the incident at the general store when she had publicly contradicted his harsh treatment of old Samuel, the town drunk. No one contradicted Jake Sullivan, and walked away unscathed. Everyone knew that much about the man who owned half the territory and ruled the other half through fear and intimidation. Her students had long since departed for their homes, leaving her alone with nothing but her wits and the loaded rifle her father had insisted she keep. The irony was not lost on her that she, a woman who had dedicated her life to education and peaceful resolution, now stood ready to defend herself with violence. "I know you're in there, schoolmarm," Jake called again, his tone carrying a hint of amusement that made her skin crawl. "I ain't leaving until we settle this matter." Catherine straightened her shoulders and smoothed her dark blue dress. If Jake Sullivan wanted a confrontation, she would not cower like a frightened child. She had faced down rowdy students, disapproving school board members, and her own father's objections to her independence. One arrogant rancher would not be her undoing. She opened the door with more confidence than she felt, keeping the rifle hidden behind her skirts. "Mr. Sullivan, what brings you to my establishment?" Jake removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that caught the late afternoon light. Despite his reputation, Catherine could not deny that he was a handsome man, tall and broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through a person's carefully constructed defenses. Those same eyes now studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that," he said, dismounting from his black stallion with fluid grace. "Most folks around here scatter like leaves when they see me coming." "Perhaps that says more about you than it does about them," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Jake's companions shifted restlessly in their saddles, but he raised a hand to still them. "Easy, boys. The lady and I are just having a conversation." He turned back to Catherine, a slow smile spreading across his weathered features. "Though I suspect this particular lady has more backbone than most men in this town. If you've come to intimidate me because of what happened at Morrison's store, you're wasting your time. I stand by what I said. No man deserves to be treated like an animal, regardless of his circumstances." "Is that what you think this is about?" Jake stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and cedar scent that clung to his clothes. "Samuel's been working odd jobs at my ranch for the past 2 weeks. Earning honest wages, sleeping in a clean bunkhouse, and eating regular meals. All because a certain schoolteacher reminded me that a man's worth isn't measured by the bottle in his hand." Catherine blinked in surprise. This was not the conversation she had expected. I don't understand." "I came here to thank you, Miss Moreau, and to apologize for my behavior that day." Jake's voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "You were right to call me out. I've spent so many years building walls around myself that I'd forgotten what it meant to show basic human kindness." The rifle slipped from Catherine's nerveless fingers, clattering to the wooden porch. She stared at this man who had just turned her entire understanding of him upside down with a few simple words. "You hired Samuel?" "I gave him a chance to earn his dignity back, just like you said he deserved." Jake bent to retrieve the fallen weapon, handling it with expert ease. "Though I have to say, I'm impressed by your choice in firearms. Your father teach you to shoot?" "He insisted upon it before allowing me to take this position." Catherine accepted the rifle back, acutely aware of how Jake's fingers brushed against hers during the exchange. A woman alone on the frontier needs to be able to protect herself. "Smart man. Though I hope you won't be needing that particular skill anytime soon." Jake settled his hat back on his head but made no move to leave. "Tell me, Miss Moreau, what brought an educated woman like yourself to a rough town like Cedar Ridge?" Catherine hesitated. The truth was complicated, bound up in family expectations, broken engagements, and a fierce desire for independence that had shocked everyone who knew her. "I wanted to make a difference," she said finally. "To help build something meaningful in a place where everything is still being written." "And are you making a difference, I mean?" She considered the question seriously. "I hope so." These children deserve better than ignorance and superstition. They deserve to dream beyond the boundaries of this valley. Even if those dreams take them far from home? Especially then. Catherine met his gaze directly. Freedom to choose one's own path is the greatest gift education can provide. Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those penetrating blue eyes. "I never learned to read properly," he said suddenly. "Growing up on the ranch, there wasn't much time for schooling. My mother tried to teach me some, but she died when I was 12. And after that," he trailed off, his jaw tightening. The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and unexpected. Catherine felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the wall she had built around her own emotions. "It's never too late to learn," she said gently. "I've taught adults before. If you're truly interested." "You'd do that? After everything you've heard about me?" "What I've heard and what I've seen today are two very different things, Mr. Sullivan." Catherine surprised herself with her boldness. Perhaps people are more complex than their reputations suggest. Jake smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face and made him look years younger. "Jake, if you're going to be my teacher, you should probably call me Jake." "Catherine," she replied automatically, then blushed at her own forwardness. Catherine. Her name sounded different on his lips, softer somehow, like a caress. "Would you consider joining me for dinner tonight? There's a new restaurant in town, and I'd like to continue this conversation in more comfortable surroundings." Every rule of propriety demanded that she refuse. A respectable unmarried woman did not dine alone with a man, especially not a man with Jake Sullivan's reputation. But something in his eyes, hope perhaps, or loneliness, made her hesitate. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate," she said slowly. "Then perhaps you'd allow me to call on you properly, with all the social niceties your father would expect?" Catherine found herself nodding before she could think better of it. Sunday afternoon would be acceptable, after church services. "Sunday it is." Jake touched the brim of his hat in farewell. "Until then, Miss Catherine." She watched from the porch as he mounted his horse and rode away with his men, her mind reeling from the unexpected encounter. Jake Sullivan was nothing like what she had imagined, complex where she had expected simplicity, vulnerable where she had anticipated only strength. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, Catherine realized that her quiet, predictable life in Cedar Ridge had just become infinitely more complicated. Sunday afternoon arrived with unusual swiftness, bringing with it a case of nerves Catherine had not experienced since her first day of teaching. She had changed her dress 3 times before settling on a modest green gown that brought out the color of her eyes, then immediately chastised herself for caring about such things. Jake arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, as punctual as any gentleman caller from her father's drawing room back in Boston. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His dark hair was freshly combed, his white shirt crisp beneath a well-tailored black vest, and his boots polished to a shine. Only the gun belt around his waist reminded her that this was still the American frontier, where danger lurked beyond the veneer of civilization. "Miss Catherine," he removed his hat as she opened the door. "You look lovely today." "Thank you." She accepted his offered arm, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at his touch. "Where shall we walk?" "I thought we might visit the creek that runs behind the church. It's peaceful there, and will be in full view of anyone who cares to look." Jake's tone suggested he was well aware of the gossip their association would generate. They strolled through the town at a leisurely pace, drawing curious glances from other residents. Catherine held her head high, refusing to be cowed by the whispers and stares. She had done nothing wrong in accepting Jake's call, regardless of what the town's moral arbiters might think. The creek was indeed peaceful, shaded by cottonwood trees and bordered by smooth stones perfect for sitting. Jake spread his coat on the ground for her to sit upon, a gesture so courtly it made her smile. "Tell me about Boston," he said, settling beside her at a respectful distance. "What was your life like before you came west?" Catherine traced patterns in the dirt with a fallen twig. "Suffocating," she admitted. "My father is a successful merchant with very specific ideas about a woman's proper place in society. I was expected to marry well, manage a household, and produce heirs. Nothing more." "But you wanted something different." "I wanted to matter. To use my mind for something beyond planning dinner parties and organizing charity bazaars." She looked up at him, surprised by her own honesty. "Does that shock you?" "Not at all. takes courage to walk away from a comfortable life in pursuit of something meaningful. Jake picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water's surface. Though I imagine your family wasn't pleased with your decision. That's an understatement. My father threatened to disown me when I broke off my engagement to his business partner's son. My mother took to her bed with vapors, convinced I was ruining the family's social standing. You were engaged? Something flickered in Jake's eyes, disappointment perhaps, or concern? To a man 20 years my senior who saw me as nothing more than an ornament for his arm and a caretaker for his existing children. Catherine's voice hardened at the memory. He made it quite clear that my role would be limited to hostess and nursemaid. When I suggested I might continue teaching after our marriage, he laughed and patted my head like I was a child who had said something amusing. Jake was quiet for several minutes, watching the water flow past their feet. What changed your mind about him? I realized I would. Catherine met his gaze directly. I want a partnership, Jake. A marriage of equals where both parties respect and value each other's contributions. If that means I'll remain a spinster schoolteacher for the rest of my days, so be it. You won't remain unmarried, Jake said with quiet certainty. You're too remarkable a woman for that. The compliment sent warmth spreading through her chest. What about you? Surely the most eligible bachelor in the territory has had opportunities for matrimony. Jake's expression darkened. I was married once. Briefly. Catherine waited, sensing there was more to the story. Her name was Rebecca. We met in Denver when I was there on business. She was visiting her aunt, fresh from finishing school back east. Beautiful, refined, everything a man like me thought he wanted. Jake's voice grew distant. We had a whirlwind courtship, married within 2 months of meeting. What happened? She couldn't adapt to ranch life. The isolation, the harsh conditions, the constant work. It was nothing like the romantic adventure she'd imagined. She grew to hate the land, hate the life, and eventually, he paused, his jaw working. Eventually, she grew to hate me too. I'm sorry. She left after 8 months, took the train back to her family in Philadelphia, filed for divorce citing abandonment and cruelty. Jake laughed bitterly. The cruelty was making her live in a place she despised, married to a man too rough around the edges for polite society. Catherine felt a pang of sympathy for both Jake and his former wife. Perhaps you were simply incompatible. That doesn't make either of you wrong, just unsuited to each other. Maybe. But it taught me that love isn't enough if two people want fundamentally different things from life. Jake turned to face her fully. That's why I need to know, Catherine, what do you see when you look at this place? At this life? She considered the question carefully, understanding its importance. I see potential. Raw, untamed potential waiting to be shaped into something extraordinary. Yes, it's harsh and unforgiving, but it's also honest in a way that civilized society rarely is. Here, people are judged by their actions, not their bloodlines or bank accounts. And you could be happy here. Truly happy, not just making the best of difficult circumstances. I am happy here, Catherine said simply. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. Something shifted in Jake's expression, hope replacing the guarded wariness he'd worn since mentioning his failed marriage. Catherine, I need to tell you something about why I really came to see you that day at the schoolhouse. Her stomach fluttered with nerves. Oh? It wasn't just to thank you about Samuel, though that's certainly part of it. The truth is, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that day at Morrison's store. The way you stood up to me, fearless and righteous, defending a man everyone else had written off. Jake shook his head. You made me see myself clearly for the first time in years, and I didn't much like what I saw. Jake. Let me finish, please. I know I don't deserve someone like you, a woman with your education, your refinement, your kind spirit. But I'm hoping you might give me a chance to prove I can be better than my reputation suggests. Catherine's breath caught at the vulnerability in his voice. This powerful man who commanded respect and fear throughout the territory was laying his soul bare before her, asking for something as simple and complex as a chance. You don't need to prove anything to me, she said softly. The man who gave Samuel a second chance, who came to apologize for his behavior, instead of retaliating against criticism, that's the real Jake Sullivan. Everything else is just armor you've worn to protect yourself. Jake reached for her hand, his fingers rough but gentle as they intertwined with hers. I want to court you properly, Catherine, with your permission and your father's blessing, if that's what it takes. I want to show you that this rough rancher can be worthy of a lady like you." The proposal sent Catherine's mind spinning. She had come west to escape the very sort of traditional courtship he was offering, yet something about Jake's approach felt different, respectful rather than possessive, requesting rather than demanding. "My father's blessing isn't necessary," she said carefully. "I'm quite capable of making my own decisions about matters of the soul. But Jake, you need to understand I won't give up teaching. My work here matters to me." "I wouldn't ask you to. Hell, I'd be honored to have the smartest woman in the territory as my wife." Jake smiled at her obvious surprise. "Did you think I'd want to dim your light? Catherine, your intelligence and independence are part of what draws me to you. And you'd truly be comfortable with a wife who works outside the home?" "I'd be proud of her." Jake's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Though I have to admit, I'm hoping you might find time to continue my education as well. A man in my position should probably know how to read contracts without having to trust someone else's interpretation." Catherine laughed, the sound bright and musical in the quiet afternoon air. "I think that could be arranged. Though I warn you, I'm a demanding teacher." "I wouldn't expect anything less." Jake lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "So you'll allow me to court you? Officially and properly?" "Yes," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'd like that very much." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Catherine had experienced in Boston's rigid social circles. Jake called on her 3 times a week, always with some small gift, wildflowers picked from the meadows surrounding his ranch, books ordered specially from Denver, once even a rare butterfly preserved under glass that made her gasp with delight. Their conversations ranged from literature to ranching, philosophy to practical concerns about the territory's future. Jake proved to be an eager student during their evening reading lessons, his quick mind grasping concepts with surprising speed, despite his late start with formal education. "You're quite brilliant, you know," Catherine told him one evening as they sat in her small parlor, a well-worn copy of Shakespeare between them. "I've taught university graduates who couldn't grasp these concepts as quickly as you do." Jake looked up from the page, his finger marking his place in the text. "It's easier when you have a good teacher, and when the subject matter actually interests you." "Does it? Interest you, I mean?" Catherine had noticed how he hung on every word during their discussions of the plays, asking thoughtful questions that showed he understood not just the plot but the deeper themes as well. "More than I expected. This Hamlet fellow reminds me of myself sometimes, too much thinking, not enough action when it counts." Jake closed the book and set it aside. "Though I hope I'm getting better at that particular failing." "In what way?" Instead of answering directly, Jake reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Catherine's breath caught as he dropped to one knee beside her chair. "Catherine Moreau, you've changed everything about how I see the world and my place in it. You've made me want to be a better man, not just for you but for myself." Jake opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a modest diamond. "I know I'm not the educated gentleman your family would have chosen for you, but I love you with everything I am. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Catherine stared at the ring, her mind reeling. They had been courting for only 2 months, yet she felt as though she had known Jake Sullivan her entire life. More importantly, she had come to love him, not the reformed version of himself he tried to present, but the complete man with all his rough edges and hidden vulnerabilities. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Jake, I'll marry you." The smile that spread across his face was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made specifically for her hand. "How did you know my size?" she asked, admiring the way the diamond caught the lamplight. "I may have asked Mrs. Patterson at the general store to help me estimate." She seemed to think it was the most romantic thing she'd ever heard. Jake reclaimed his seat, though he moved his chair closer to hers. "I also took the liberty of writing to your father, asking for his blessing. Not because you need his permission, but because I wanted him to know his daughter is marrying a man who respects and cherishes her." Catherine felt tears in her eyes. "You wrote to Papa?" "Seemed like the right thing to do. I told him about the ranch, about my intentions regarding your teaching, about how proud he should be of the remarkable woman he raised." Jake took her hands in his. "I also invited him to the wedding, though I understand if the journey is too difficult." "He'll come," Catherine said with certainty. "He may disapprove of my choices, but he loves me too much to miss my wedding day." And indeed, 3 weeks later, Catherine's father arrived on the afternoon stage, looking every inch the proper Boston gentleman in his dark suit and polished shoes. James Moreau was a tall, distinguished man with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, eyes that now studied Jake Sullivan with undisguised skepticism. "Papa." Catherine embraced her father warmly, grateful beyond words that he had made the long journey west. "Catherine, you look," he paused, his expression softening as he took in her appearance. "You look happy, my dear, truly happy." "I am, Papa, more than I've ever been." James turned his attention to Jake, who stood quietly beside them with his hat in his hands. "Mr. Sullivan, I presume." "Sir." Jake extended his hand. "Thank you for coming. It means everything to Catherine, which means everything to me." The two men shook hands, James measuring Jake with the same careful attention he'd once given to potential business partners. "Your letter was illuminating. Tell me, what are your intentions regarding my daughter's career?" "To support it in every way possible, sir. Catherine is a gifted teacher, and this community needs her skills. I'd be a fool to ask her to give up something that brings her such fulfillment." "And financially, can you provide for her properly?" "The ranch is profitable and growing. Catherine will never want for anything I can provide." Jake's voice was respectful but firm. "More importantly, I can promise you that she'll be loved and valued every day of our marriage." James studied Jake for a long moment before nodding slowly. "That's what every father wants to hear. Though I confess, this is not the life I envisioned for my daughter." "I know, sir. But sometimes the life we choose for ourselves is better than the one others choose for us." Catherine stepped closer to Jake, taking his arm. "I love him, Papa. And he loves me for exactly who I am, not for who he thinks I should become." "Then that's all that matters." James smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. "Though I do hope you'll consider visiting Boston occasionally. Your mother would never forgive me if I didn't secure that promise." "Of course, Papa. Jake and I have already discussed it." The wedding took place 3 days later in the small church where Catherine had attended services since arriving in Cedar Ridge. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, curiosity about their schoolteacher's marriage to the territory's most notorious rancher overriding any social reservations. Catherine wore her mother's ivory silk gown, altered to fit her smaller frame, with a simple veil secured by the pearl combs her grandmother had worn at her own wedding. Jake was resplendent in a new black suit ordered from Denver, his hair tamed for once into submission. As they stood before Reverend Mitchell, exchanging vows in voices that carried clearly through the packed church, Catherine felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. This was right, not just the marriage itself, but the entire journey that had led her to this moment. "Do you, Jacob Sullivan, take Catherine to be your lawfully wedded wife to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" "I do," Jake said, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. "And do you, Catherine Moreau, take Jacob be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" "I do." Catherine's voice was strong and clear, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake's kiss was gentle but thorough, a promise of the life they would build together. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, but Catherine barely heard them over the sound of her own racing pulse. Epilogue. 1 year later, Catherine Sullivan stood in the doorway of her expanded schoolhouse, watching as Jake helped little Tommy Morrison with his arithmetic while she tended to the newest students. Her husband had proven to be a natural teacher himself, patient and encouraging with the children who struggled with their lessons. "Mrs. Sullivan," Mary Beth Taylor raised her hand. "Will you tell us again about the lady who wrote that story about the proud man and the stubborn woman?" Catherine smiled, settling into her chair at the front of the classroom. "You mean Jane Austen in Pride and Prejudice?" "Yes, I want to write stories like that someday." "Then you must read everything you can get your hands on and practice writing every day," Catherine advised. "Great authors are made through dedication and hard work, not just talent." As the afternoon wore on and the students completed their lessons, Catherine reflected on the changes the past year had brought. The schoolhouse had been expanded with funds from Jake's ranch, allowing them to accommodate more students and offer advanced classes. She had also begun teaching adult literacy classes in the evenings, with Jake as her star pupil. Their marriage had exceeded even her highest expectations. Jake had kept every promise he'd made during their courtship, supporting her work while building a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The ranch prospered under his careful management, and Catherine had found herself enjoying the challenge of helping plan improvements and expansions. Most surprisingly, she had discovered a talent for ranching itself. Jake taught her to really ride, not the sedate saddle style considered proper for ladies, and she often accompanied him on his rounds of the property. She learned to read the signs of weather and season, to judge the quality of grazing land, and to spot potential problems before they became serious threats. "Catherine?" Jake appeared at her elbow as the last student departed for home. "Your father's telegram arrived. He and your mother will be here next month for the school's summer exhibition." "Wonderful. Mother will be so pleased to see how well the children perform." Catherine began gathering the papers scattered across her desk. "And perhaps this time she'll stop worrying about my unfortunate circumstances." Jake laughed, pulling her into his arms for a quick embrace. "I think your mother's opinion of me improved considerably when she received that first photograph of us together. Hard to argue with evidence of your happiness. Especially when that evidence includes the fact that her supposedly ruined daughter is now helping to run one of the most successful ranches in the territory." Catherine leaned into Jake's warmth, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his broad chest, though I suspect she's still hoping I'll develop a sudden interest in more traditional feminine pursuits. "And will you?" Catherine pretended to consider the question. "Well, I have been thinking about learning to preserve vegetables from our garden. Very domestic and proper. Practical, too. A woman of many talents." Jake pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Ready to head home, Mrs. Sullivan?" "Ready, Mr. Sullivan." They walked together toward the ranch, where a comfortable house awaited them, not grand by Boston standards, but perfect for two people who had found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. As they crested the hill that overlooked the valley, Catherine paused to admire the view that had become as dear to her as any masterpiece hanging in her father's study. "No regrets?" Jake asked softly, following her gaze across the rolling grassland dotted with cattle. "Only one," Catherine replied, turning to smile at her husband. "That it took me so long to find my way here." Jake's answering smile was radiant as he pulled her close for a kiss that tasted of love, laughter, and the limitless possibilities that stretched before them like the vast Colorado sky. In the distance, the school bell chimed as the wind caught its bronze surface, a musical note that carried across the valley like a benediction, a sound that spoke of new beginnings, second chances, and the extraordinary power of two souls who had found their perfect match in each other and in the wild, beautiful land they now called home. The end.